There we go. Look at there.
Hey, welcome to TechNow, the podcast that takes a look into the minds and ideas and solves problems for ServiceNow administrators and developers. I am Chuck Tomasi, platform architect with ServiceNow, and this is where we throw the coins on the floor and see who scrambles for the next intro.
Go for it, Dave. You do it this time.
I'm Dave Slusher. I'm developer evangelist with the platform business unit at ServiceNow.
And I am Craig Stepp. I'm a senior curriculum developer in education services at ServiceNow.
And articulated, too.
Yes. Very much so.
We are here to talk about automated test framework today, and I'm going to turn control over to Dave. He's going to drive the slides and the demo. This is his show today, so this is about the last you'll see of us till the end, where we wave
you and
goodbye.
I will just kick back and, with our hands behind our head and chill out.
Right.
That's right.
All right, let's lock it to me.
Yep.
And hide the avatars. Are we right? Is that right?
I'm going to double check.
Feels right to me.
Waiting for that few 8-second delay.
All right.
I've still got avatars, but we might just still be behind the delay.
All right. Well, let's roll with this anyway, because I have for sure the avatars are turned off.
I turned them off on this end too, I thought. Okay.
All right. All right. So, yes, this is episode 35, Automated Test Framework. Let's go to the longer bios, starting with Chuck.
Hi, as I mentioned, I'm Chuck Tomasi, platform architect at ServiceNow, and I've been here since about 2010. I was a customer for a couple of years before that, won the first Innovation of the Year award, and came to ServiceNow as a very happy employee. Been doing pre-sales for about the last year or so in the platform practice team, helping customers to recognize more value out of ServiceNow.
And next, Mr.
Yeah,
Stepp.
look at that beautiful mug. Oh man, that's awesome. I'm a senior curriculum developer in education services. I was an automation consultant and specializing in orchestration and cloud management. And now I teach people about it. So that's what I'm doing in education services. I had no prior experience to ServiceNow other than what Chuck showed me before I started. And it's been a wild ride ever since. And I've had a great time. It's a fantastic place to learn and meet all kinds of people. And of course, you can see my hobbies at the bottom: podcasting, photography, and Linux.
There you go. And for me, I am, as I said, developer evangelist with the platform business unit. If you go to developer.servicenow.com, that's where I and my partner Josh Nereus do a lot of our work. And we kind of we don't control that space so much, but that's what a lot of the content that we put up is around there. I spent 20 years as a full stack developer. A lot of work behind the scenes, a lot of app server work. I worked for Orbitz for a while. If you ever if you're ever in Orbit searching for a flight and you can look at the seat map, that's I did that back in like 2004. Not the seat map, but I made it so you can see it from the search path. Cool. I've been with ServiceNow since 2013. I also, like Craig, I came in here kind of cold. Did not have previous experience. I started as a developer evangelist fall of 2015, and have been the co-host of TechNow since the beginning of 2016. And this is, I liked my job before and I love this job now. So this is truly has become my dream job. So, and similar to these guys, we all know each other. We actually have known each other for over a decade now from the world of podcasting, but I also collect comic books, active in science fiction fandom and things like that. So let us get into the crux of the biscuit. Knowledge 17.
I didn't know biscuits had cruxes, but that's a funny visual.
Or cruxes.
Hey, we want to remind you that Knowledge 17 is now less than 12 weeks away as we record this. So please, if you haven't done so, early bird registration expires at the end of February. Go get your registration. It is May 7th through 12th at the OC Convention Center in Orlando. I believe that stands for Orlando County, Orange County. I can't remember. There's lots of oranges down there. But
Yeah.
you'll get more information once you sign up. Networking labs sessions, I think it's 80 or 90% of the sessions are customer led. So there's a strong testimonial as to how well people are doing and what they're doing. And you will find more information at the knowledge.servicenow.com website. It's a good time. All three of us should be there, crossing our fingers, making sure nothing unexpected comes up. And commercial over.
All right.
Commercial over.
So let us begin with the community quick tip.
Yeah, I found something really interesting the last few weeks in messing around with the. Someone had a question on the community, and I was doing something in my own application, and I went to delete some records. I was doing a demo of automated test framework, which we will be doing shortly, and I went to delete a test, and it said, "Hey, warning, Will Robinson, you're going to also delete 6 test steps at the same time." And I went, "That is a great feature. How do you do that? I want to know how to do that because." Anytime I see a feature, the first thing I think is, I want to do that in one of my applications.
Yeah, right.
I always have lots of hierarchical tables like exams and questions and answers, or in this case, tests and test steps. I have another one where I've got dates and events, and there's always related lists and related fields, and you want to clean up stuff instead of orphan records. Because if you delete a test and there's still test steps hanging around, what do you do with those records? They just sort of accumulate, and then you look at them in a list and they have no parent and they're orphaned. So I said, I want to know how to do this. And it's very, very easy. So Dave's going to reveal the secret sauce in the slides as I continue to talk. Ding. Here's my simple use case. I have a person table with a related list of attributes, and each attribute record has a related list of options. So there is a reference field on the option table called attribute. And there is a reference field on attribute called person, and you can infer what those things point to. So we've got this hierarchical structure. I probably could have made this 2 levels, but I want to make it 3 just to show you that the Chuck record has an age and a city, and there's options on the age, and you can do whatever you want with this data, but it's the same situation no matter what hierarchical table structure data model you come up with. And with that, ding, I love doing that. You find the reference field on the child table. I want to make sure this is very clear. I'm not looking at the parent table. I'm looking at the attribute table that points to the person. And on that dictionary entry, there is a field. You have to click Advanced View to see this stuff. Right below where you do your reference qualifiers, there's a field called Reference Cascade Rule. And it is a choice list that gives you several choices, one of which is Cascade. So if I delete the Chuck record, then the attribute.person field says, what do you want me to do when that record goes away? And it says Cascade. So it will delete the attribute records associated with that. It doesn't go down to the next tier. That would be the reference field on the tier below it. So it's not on the table because I may have reference fields that I want to enforce this with. I may want to have other reference field on the same table that I don't, so on and so forth. So this is the key that makes it all go. Oh, we went back to viewer mode. Ding.
That's actually good to know because you can very easily come up with some orphan records in ServiceNow if you know.
I used to do this with fixed scripts. I used to do this with business rules and saying, oh, it's a delete business rule, so watch out. Apologies for what this slide says if it's confusing, because there are options that do the same thing twice. I'm not sure why or what the difference is. I've got a query out to our developers to clarify this, and we will get that online as soon as possible. But if you leave the list option at -- none, meaning there's no value in this choice field, or set it to clear, it will delete the references to the parent table. Meaning the record is still there, it's just cleared out.
That's where you get the orphans at, yes.
No, that's not an orphan record, actually. It's just a record that points to nothing.
Right.
Okay. If you set it to delete or cascade, that's where it comes up and says, hey, you're going to delete some records here. Are you sure? If you set it to restrict, it says you cannot delete records from this table. It's too important. There's child records that must delete here. If you set it to none, that's where none on the bottom, not the -- none. Totally confusing, I know. Especially when 2 of them do the same darn thing. Why do we even have a -- none? But if you leave it at the none on the bottom, that's where it leaves the child record completely untouched. You will have orphan records. You'll have sysids in a field that point to nothing. Now, you may want that. If your intent, for example, is to run some tests and continue to restore the records from XML, they're going to have the same sysid every time. Whereas if you cleared them out, you'd restore your parent records and the child's would be going, my value is blank. I don't point to you anymore, remember? So there are use cases for these. Delete no workflow. I'm still a mystery on that one. I suspect deleting Cascade will also take care of any running workflows maybe, and delete no workflow. Again, not totally documented in the wiki or the doc site. So we are working on improving that. That's why I like discovering this stuff, because we also discover gaps. So you know what? I'm going to leave it at that. I don't think we necessarily need to do a demo on this one, Dave.
Okay.
Let's spend more time on ATF. If anybody wants to know more information about this stuff, ping me on the community. I'm always there, and I'll be happy to answer any questions you have. For now, think of this as an easy way to clean up child records if you're deleting parent records at the same time.
Yeah, I guess really the way I think about it is that when you're defining a record that is, that exists because of a relationship with another record. You're basically saying that record now is making the decision of what meaning or value do I have if that other record exists. And so in the example of like a user pref, right, they have zero meaning if the user is gone. So there's no reason to keep them around. There could be a reason, why that record has some meaning and needs to exist, but in the top case, like clear out the reference. Does this record have value minus the reference? That's kind of the decision-making process you're thinking about. There you go. Already.
There you go. Main event.
All right, we'll skip the demo. So we're gonna talk. We when we did our Istanbul overview last month, we did a very brief run over of the possibilities of automated test framework. So we went through it. It was pretty highly constrained, and so we're going to do basically the full show version of that, because as we found last time, I basically ate up all the time. It was a long demo, and we didn't cover everything. So we're going to kind of do that, take our time, talk about it kind of deliberately and thoroughly, and go through the automated test framework. And as you see there, there's the bit.ly link. If you want to follow that, that takes you to the full show listing, and you can click episode 35, leave comments, whether real time or you're looking at this after the fact. You can go to the community and participate in the conversation there. So the automated testing framework is rolling out, or has rolled out, in Istanbul. And so the purpose behind this is to start giving users the ability to do some kind of automated verification of functionality. At Knowledge 16, I gave a presentation on doing automated testing, and this was pre-ATF. So we're talking about using the QUnit plugin that was, that existed and was mysterious and almost entirely undocumented and didn't make any sense to anyone. And so I talked about that and some other options, and that session was completely packed, and it was palpable, the excitement in the room, because people had a need for this, right? The classic story that we heard from one of the attendees of that was talking about having the test script that was defined of all the tests that needed to be run, and they handed them to a bank of people who sat in a room for an entire week and ran all these tests. And as soon as that test script's done, they have a result for that version, and the first time you change anything, it has no meaning. And we did some math on the cost, and we realized that it was $20,000 of their of human time to have run that one test. So that single occurrence of the test, which had a shelf life not as good as a gallon of milk, cost them $20,000. And it was going to cost them $20,000 the next time and every time. Ouch. So this is the kind of problem. And people have this problem out in the world. And we see this most notably is we see this experienced in the form, or realized in the form, of reluctance to upgrade. because it does not make sense for a customer with a large investment in customization, a lot of custom behavior in the form of business rules and UI scripts and et cetera. They have to validate everything at every upgrade. And so it is possible. I can't remember. Chuck, you had the anecdote where it took something like 3 or 4 months to validate the upgrade, which is...
Yeah, I was on a call earlier this week with a customer that said that it takes them 12 weeks to validate an upgrade. By that time, you're halfway to the next upgrade or less.
Right. So this is what leads to, the tiger leaping of versions, the only upgrading every third family, upgrading only when end of life is near. And frankly, it would benefit everybody if it was less expensive and easier to upgrade, right? The customers would benefit. I mean, every version has great functionality, new cool stuff. And it's one of the sad parts of my job is realizing that we've had, every release since Fuji has had great developer tools, and there are people who don't have them yet. There are people who don't have scripted REST APIs yet. There are people who don't have Studio yet. And so having everyone on the most current version as soon as possible definitely helps. And just as we said, just reducing the cost that it takes to validate anything is kind of why this exists. It's why it rolled out. And so let's run through the agenda. I'm going to give a background of the automated testing framework. I'm going to do an overview of the features that are currently available in Istanbul. I'm going to talk a little about the pros and cons of using ATF, again, kind of, as rooted in the now, because this is, like most of these tools like Studio, et cetera, you have a version 1 and then you see kind of rapid iteration. Service Portal, is the same way. And we're seeing Istanbul, this is the version 1. There will be rapid iteration. Jakarta and Kingston, we can expect them to be, that ball to be moved much further down the road, but we're talking in the context of right now. And then I will do a demo of that. And present the reference information. All right, so a little about the automated testing framework. This is a need for many customers, as we kind of talked about in the preamble. Validating functionality, validating correctness of behavior, high cost in the family version upgrades. So we've got ATF. It's out in Istanbul. It's, I believe, and I forgot to check this before we got it, I believe that it's enabled by default. No, it's not enabled by default. I believe you have to go and turn this on.
It's enabled for new instances. I thought it was for upgrades as well. Yeah, I haven't missed it yet.
Yeah, we'll have to check and see. It may actually be by the type of instance. So productions may not get it. Subprods may get it by default, and productions doesn't. Something like that. It delivered as of Istanbul. It's delivered with 19 test steps that are built in, and we'll kind of go over what exactly a test step is. A step config. These are basically 19 types of functionality that you can do, that you can get out of the box. Over time, and these are, by the way, they're the ones that come out now. All of them are kind of general platform things. They're around forms. They're around users. Around doing a hook to do generic scripting. What they aren't is a lot of very product-centric, business unit-centric tests. So at this point, they're, I don't know if you call it high level or low level. They're very not abstract. They're very rooted to the user interface itself. There's not, for example, a test service cart type, examine cart or verify is in cart type step config. There's not a verify valid incident type config, because at this point they're kind of at the level of the platform itself. But the plan is over time, we don't make a lot of forward-looking statements. This one we can say is that over time it will trend to more and more of the individual products on our platform will have test step configs delivered with future releases. It's worth noting that commercial alternatives do exist. So when there is a big business need like this, when there's a big problem that lots of people have, that is, if you're an entrepreneurial sort, you can look at that and say, well, that's a market potential for me to solve that problem. And so people have been out there solving this problem. So Cerna Capio is one of them. Worksoft has automated testing frameworks. I know for a fact Capio's is, I believe, a Selenium grid style test. I'm not exactly sure what Worksoft's is, which are very different from what I'm going to show you. But they are out there. In some ways, these have been in the market longer. They are more mature solutions in a lot of ways. So if you want to explore those, it's certainly it would be a reasonable thing to do if you find that ATF doesn't get you all the way. And there's also no reason why you can't do a hybrid where you do some things in one framework, some things in another framework. And there's also no reason why the ServiceNow automated test framework can't be a feeder. If you start with that and you get the automated testing religion and you decide you can't wait for the framework to iterate and you need something more comprehensive now, definitely the partner ecosystem of commercial alternatives is definitely a great place to look. They may be a better, depending on your needs, on the timetable that you have them, they may be a better fit at this moment. And like I said, they may have different strengths and focus than ServiceNow. ServiceNow, at this moment, does not do browser compatibility particularly elegantly. That would be like a weakness of our framework. If that's what you need, actually, Capio does that better, right, as of today. So it's definitely worth keeping that in mind. So let's go through an overview of features. And by the way, guys, stop me if there's anything you want to interject. Anything you guys want to say on that? I am plowing straight forward and using up all the oxygen.
So keep going, buddy.
All right. All right. So I'm going to kind of talk through the features, and I'm going to both in this and in when I do the demo. I'm still, Chuck, you've been in the position of kind of doing some of these demos. I've been in the position of kind of talking about it and writing about it more and more over the last month and a half. Usually I've been doing it in kind of this pyramid approach where I start at the low level, basically the most atomic actions, and I kind of move it up and up and up towards what you would actually end up using, as the test you would execute. So I'm kind of at the lowest level. You've got your test configuration. You've got a test step configuration. There are 19 pre-configured step configurations as delivered out of the box in Istanbul. So as I said before, these are various atomic actions, some of which they can be let me go forward. You can build your own test step config. The terminology is tripping me up here. You can build your own step configuration. There is an open spec. You can go and look and see the pieces that you need to deliver. And you can actually, there's no reason why you can't look at the ones that are delivered and see how they built it. This could be time consuming. So, if you did not need to make that investment, you probably wouldn't. But if you find that you can use, the test framework as it exists now gets you 80% of the way there, and a little bit of more custom coding gets you, 99% of the way there, it may be worth it to you to spend that energy. When you take a step configuration and you basically apply specifics to it. So we have an open a form step config. When you actually configure that to say open this form, it becomes a test step. So that's kind of that's one of the little mental things that I want to make sure that people understand is a step config is the generic thing, and a test step is the instantiated version of it inside a test. And Chuck, the analogy you used was like a widget to a widget instance in Service Portal.
Yeah. Yeah, where the widget defines some parameters you can put on there, like a user or a list or a table. It doesn't do anything. It's a blueprint. And then in this case, the test step configuration is the same way. It's a blueprint. And then the test step, when you put it on your test, becomes that, like you said, instantiation of it with the parameters filled out, etc.
Right. And so, one of the things that I do also want to note is that those step configurations, and we'll see this when we go through the demo, and I'll make a point of calling this out, is that they're both client and server side, and they're a mix of actions and assertions. And we'll go through that. I thought I had a sub bullet of that, which may actually be on this next part. So test and test steps. So now, because as we kind of move up the pyramid of composition, right? You have the existence of the step configs. You've instantiated them as test steps. A group of test steps in a meaningful order. So let's say impersonate a user, which is usually the first step config of any test. You impersonate a user, you open a form, you fill out the form, you submit the form, and then you make assertions on the record after submission. That would be a meaningful test. So you compose a test based of these individual test steps. And then when you're done, beginning to end, typically they're organized around exercising, like a vertical slice of functionality. So creating an incident, would be a thing that you might test, or, validating a record was updated properly, that sort of thing. So they, like I said, they tend to be organized through transactions, like beginning to end. And let me emphasize that transaction isn't necessarily a single page submit. But when I say transaction, I just mean all the steps that you might take to get a set of work done, from the very first page load through the final result. And here it is. It can be a mix of client and server code, and it can be a mix of actions to take. So a thing that I do, a value that I set, a form I submit, a page I load, etc. And then they can be assertions. They can be the checking of a value. Does the value equal this? Does the state of a form element equal this? Right? I expect this form element to be mandatory at this time. Is it mandatory or is it not mandatory? I expect it to be read only. Is that correct at this point? Both your action type steps and your assertion type steps can generate a test failure. And by the way, this is my terminology. This doesn't exist anywhere on here. So I like to kind of keep it separate in my head. Just, it helps me when I'm using this to keep it clear whether I'm asserting or whether I'm acting on the record or the user interface. But either one of these things can generate a failure. So if you go to submit a form and for some reason the form submission gets aborted, that can generate a failure. And clearly an assertion type, when you say does this value equal that and it equals something else, then that will generate a test failure. So, and then actually, let me back up one more thing. And then those test failures, we're going to see in a little bit how those test failures can bubble. So, what's the meaning of one failure on an individual step config? So when we go through the demo, I'll make sure and kind of point out some of that. So then as you kind of move up the composition tree, when you think about it, you're not, it would be very cumbersome to act on single tests, right? Because one would expect a mature customer with a lot of functionality. You could have dozens, probably hundreds of these tests, if you were using this discipline long enough. And so you would ease the pain a little bit, but if you have somebody who has to actually sit and click 100 different tests, you've just sort of moved your problem a little bit, right? You still are paying somebody to click things. They're just clicking fewer things. So the way you get around this is you organize your tests into meaningful sets of suites, and then you could operate on the suite level. So you group your tests into suites. Tests and suites have a many-to-many type relationship, meaning a test can be in many suites. A suite can have many tests in it, and it's not exclusive. And I don't know if I would say it's one of these things. I haven't actually seen that many people who have begun strapping, real-world cases of this. I would imagine that in the long run, it is common that tests exist in more than one suite. Because partly because, as we'll see before, you can, as we see in the demo, you can group suites together. So you can have a master suite that's composed of other suites, but also you may have tests that exist in a suite based around a product, and you may have tests that are based around a milestone. So I can see it being highly common to say that we have a Sprint 5 test suite, and the definition of complete, the completion definition of test is of Sprint 5 is that we run this and we get no failure. So when this thing is green, that means we're done. But at the same time, all those tests also live somewhere else. If you're testing a custom app, you might have one test suite that is just that app that you may want to be able to test it in isolation. So the ability to kind of have those related in different ways is meaningful, because you may want to, your overnight nightly acceptance test probably runs everything, but during the day, you may want to only test a subset, as part of your development experience. And one of the things that we will see again is that there can be substantial time on the tests that these tests take to run. So, if it takes an hour to run a test, a test suite, you may want to compose that into shorter things to make it more flexible to use during your workday. They can be, again, organized application, sprint, or anything that has meaning to you. If you have a use case that's none of these, I'd like to hear it, because I'm curious kind of how people think about this and how people use it. You can configure the suites, and I'll show this configuration to. It's actually, I realized that I have this slightly wrong in the slide, and we will again call this out specifically in the demo. Is that this is not suites are not configured at the high level. So you don't configure a suite that says I will stop on first failure. You actually configure a suite test by test, and the suite, the test in the suite can be configured to cancel the execution of this suite or not. So I will show that in the demo. So I actually kind of had a slight misunderstanding of that when I put these together, and I just figured that out not long before airtime. So
we're all learning as we go.
Yeah.
I knew it the whole time, just to say. Yeah.
So the act of running the test, as we said before, the tests are a mix of client-side code and of server-side code. And so the server-side code, when you execute it, just runs. But it is extremely common that your set of tests starts on the server side. As I said before, typically impersonate a specific user will be where almost every test, possibly every test ever, does that, because one of the first things you need to know in ServiceNow is who's running this test with what roles. And so if you don't do that, you're actually going to be running it as like whatever admin is executing the test. Probably not what you want. So the server-side tests will just run. At some point, you will get into a client-side test. So like say you're opening not always, but usually you're going to have a client-side test. When you get to a client-side test, at that point, your test will either halt execution if there is not a client-side test runner, or else it will pass that execution off to a client-side test runner. At that point, the client test runner will take that up. It will act on that test, and it will report back what those results are. And so we'll see this when we go through the demo. These client test runners are sitting there. Anyone that's open is actively polling the server to see, are there queued client-side tests that need somebody to run them? And if they are, they will the server will say, yes, I do have a queued task. Take this one, run this one, report back. So in a lot of ways, showing our age, when we were talking about this before, we were discussing SETI at home. It's that kind of model where you've got basically a client system out there asking a server for little pieces of work that it then does and reports back to the server. In the old days, I believe when they did the graphics on Babylon 5, that everybody that lived in the office, worked in that office, at the end of the day would slave their workstations, and their SGI things are rendering all night long. That's how you had to do it back when compute power was somewhat scarce. And so this is kind of a similar model to that. one of the side effects of that, when I said earlier that browser compatibility is not the easiest thing in the world to test with ATF as it exists as of Istanbul, this is part of that reason, because when you've got multiple client test runners open on the same instance, all those guys are in there. They're all polling. They're all looking for work to be picked up and executed. You can't really guarantee which client test runner is going to do which work. It's really kind of random, FIFO. Whoever asks for it first gets to do it. So I may be with Chrome on Mac, and you may have IE on Windows, and whichever one gets it is who's going to run it. And so if you're trying to exhaustively test some browser compatibility, what you have to do is coordinate amongst all those test runners. And like, we're going to run the test suite, and this is the only runner that's open. Then we're going to rerun it, and the IE is the only one that's open. So as opposed to other systems where you've got, you define a Selenium grid, and you say, I want to run it on this matrix of these browsers on these OSs, and there's however many 100 combinations of them, and you're going to rerun the tests 100 times on each one of these combinations of OS and browser. That is extremely cumbersome to do as of the ATF in Istanbul. So as I said, if you're going to do that, requires coordination. So kind of we'll talk a little more about the pros and cons of Istanbul. The pro is that this is a first-class citizen of ServiceNow. So it's a documented need that lots of people have. It's it costs a lot of customers money to validate their system across upgrades, across across app releases, across configuration releases. So being able to reduce that cost is a good thing for everyone involved. Upgrades become cheaper. That's what we want, right? That's ultimately. There are many benefits from that. I believe that this was probably the biggest selling point to everyone who decided that this would become part of our platform, is that we want customers to be able to upgrade, like Chuck was saying, we wanted to take less than 3 months to validate your upgrade. The cons, it's not a comprehensive solution. It is trending towards more and more functionality, right? This is, V1 releases, particularly of program tools in ServiceNow, typically we get things out as we can, and then we add functionality to them. And this is very much in that that mode of delivery, right? It exists, it works. There will be more functionality in future versions. There are, and part of why it's not comprehensive is limited config steps, right? They are platform steps. They are not, you can't assert higher level aspects of a problem. You can't do, HR specific things from the testing framework. The goal is in the future that the HR team will actually, as they deliver features, will deliver tests that test those features. But that does not happen nowadays. All right. And so now, time for demo. You guys want to discuss anything before I jump into the demo?
No, we like demos.
Yeah.
All right.
Show me.
I'm gonna take a breath. I've been talking for about 30 minutes straight. So, all right, let's go into full screen. So, go into automated test. You'll see the automated test framework, and so I'm going to kind of walk through this in pretty much the same order that I discussed it, in the same order that I like to think about it in. We'll start with the step configurations. And so these are those built-in step configurations. And you'll notice I sorted on category, partly so that I can do that distinction. Like right now, the categories, there are two categories that exist in the system. They are form and they're server. So form is client side, server is server side. And so you'll notice server impersonate user. Let me click on one of these just to kind of show you what they look like. It's a server, it's an independent environment. It runs on the server, so as you define it. It's a class type. Actually, the class type Java, I think means that it is built in. You don't have access to it, right? It's built as part of the framework on the server side. It's got a little description, et cetera, and they're all built like this. In this particular case, it's got some input variables and some output variables. The input is the user. This is the thing you're going to configure when you instantiate the test step. In this case, the output value, same thing, is the user that you impersonated. And so you go back here, and again, so the server ones, you'll notice. Let me kind of call out my own personal distinction between the action and the assertion. So impersonation is an action. Record query is an action. Record validation, that would be kind of an assertion, right? That's you're looking at that to see does something match up. But like on the server side, almost all of these guys on the server side are action type tests. Over here on the client side, we've got open a form, click a UI action, et cetera, click a modal button, open a record, et cetera, submit a form, all actions. But then you've got things like field value validations. That's making sure that's looking at the value contained in a field. So your test you may say have a business rule that will say automatically rewrite the short description if it's in a certain category. So you may want to, in order to test that business rule is operating, you may have a test that sets up and submits an incident of that type, and then comes back over here and looks at the resulting record and validates that your value actually has been changed to the thing you expected to be changed to. That would be kind of like what you would use field value validation. Field state validation is what I was saying before. Is you may want to do this to validate that your client scripts are doing what you expect. You have a policy such that when a certain value is selected, another field becomes either not visible or becomes read-only or mandatory, etc. And so you want to then change those values and then do this assertion to make sure that that is in fact the case. And if that fails, then you have a test failure. So that's step configuration. So let's look at steps. Now let me do one second. Get my script open. Okay, so I've talked about client versus server. So let me show a test. And so these are, other than one that I have built, these are mostly the ones that come delivered out of the box. And so there's a spread of tests that do various work. And I think almost every bit of kind of functionality and mode that you would operate in exists somewhere in one of these demo example tests. So let me show basic UI test, because this is a good one to kind of get your feet wet with. Hold on one second.
Okay, we'll hold.
You had to cough or sneeze or something.
I know.
I know that emergency claim.
Well, Chuck, I was going to be a professional and not mention that, but yes, you're right.
We're all human.
Yeah, sure. Maybe. Not you, Chuck. I don't think you are.
No.
All right, guys, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay.
Sideboard.
All right. In the annals of TechNow, that was a unique one. A dog just physically pulled my Ethernet cord out of my computer.
Wow.
I hope. I mean, we're looking at the screen still.
The dog ate my Ethernet.
All right. Are you guys actually seeing as my screen started responding?
It's still live.
Okay, great. Okay. So you see that, like, this is what I was talking about before when you kind of go through the transaction. And again, when I say transaction, I don't mean a single page transaction. I mean basically a chunk of logical work from beginning to end. That may be a single page. It may be multiple pages. It may be one record. It could be multiple types of form, right?
Yeah, I can't think of the word, but I would posit that the appropriate length of these tests is as short as possible. Keep them as almost like functional unit tests so that you can use them over and over in different places and test them independently, or even stack them up to say, this is my first test. I'm going to open a form, set some field values, submit the form. Right after that, I expect to have that form submitted with certain values. I can run a different test against that.
Yes. that sounds fair to me.
Oh,
Yeah.
All right.
you lost your screen locking thing. I think we're flipping back and forth now.
All right. So let's see. Chuck, I think you might have to lock it on me.
I can do that, Dave. There we go.
I've got avatars turned on. All right. Again, sorry, but this will all be traced back to a single dog. So if this had happened in the early days of computers, we would call them dogs and not bugs.
That's right.
Okay, so forgive me, I'm not exactly sure where I cut out. So I was talking about kind of going through a unit of work that could be, you could, for example, if one of the things that you wanted your automated test to do, this would be actually a common real world case, is you're creating a request and you want to make sure that a set of tasks are created automatically. So you could very well, your test, even though your test might span impersonating a user, opening a form, submitting a form, and then loading other records, to verify that that they were created properly. Right? You may be querying on records where the tasks where the parent is the record that we created, in step 3 of this. So so they're not necessarily organized around a single form. They're organized really around a set of work that is meaningful together. So this is, so the UI test is one of these, right? So you impersonate a record, you impersonate a given user so that you know where you're at. You open a form, you set some field values, you submit the form. Now, if we go back at the test, we've got some more, slightly more complicated ones that, see one that here's one where you're validating. So in this case, you're actually just validating the defaults of the form, right? You impersonate, you open the form, you're not even submitting it. You just want to make sure that the form comes up in a given test. And this, this could be extremely common type scenario for our customers, right? They have done some customizations. They want to make sure that this is how a given form is presented by default. And so that's, when I talk about the hybrid type solutions, it is entirely possible that you have, you may still have the bank of people in a room with a test script, but you've taken some of those steps out of the test script because they are automatable. So that is definitely, like, anything that you can, any bit of this ball that can be moved down the field is so much the better. So let me go back. Let me show. Well, I can even do it from this. We're going to run this test. So you can run these tests from the test level, and typically, you're going to do that when you've got, when you're working on the test itself. Either when you're doing just that little bit of functionality and you're developing and you want to make sure that test passes, or when you're developing the test itself. And as you can see, it did the server step just fine. And the server step here was impersonation. Now it wants to open a form. It can't do that until it has a browser waiting to pick up the test. And this is what I was talking about before. Click here to open up the test runner. So we'll do that. Click it. And there is the test runner. And you notice in that execution frame that it is now doing all that stuff, doing all the stuff of that test. If you click over to the debug info tab, you'll see a bunch of JSON that's kind of generated as a part of that. And probably there are things that can be done with this at this stage of the game. I actually don't know. I'm sure that there's some kind of validation that you do some machine verification on this. At this stage of the game, I don't actually know exactly what you would do with that.
Fun to look at.
It is. It's a lot. Note that there was a lot of data there. Yeah, and so this test passed, right? We saw everything that we expected to see. If you go to the result, this is the result of that test. This is each of the steps: impersonate, success. And as I said before, both actions and assertions, right?
Notice that action had order by default. It's sorting by some crazy
sorting by start time.
Descended, but yeah.
Yeah, so it's already descended by start time, but execution order does it this way. So you impersonate, you opened the form, that was successful, and then validation was successful. And note up here too, there's screenshots. So there's basically screenshots of each of those steps. And when you do the screenshot, you see basically it's that it's the frame from that executor. So It doesn't necessarily have all the CSS that you would expect in a fully realized UI, but you kind of get a sense of what it was at the basically at the conclusion of that test step.
There's one thing I want to mention real quick, because you've already run tests in the past. The first time you try running a test, it will come up on your instance and will say, this instance is not configured to run test. Go turn on the property. And there's a link to it. Correct. That will bring you right there. So don't be stunned if your demo didn't go exactly like Dave's the first time. You got to turn on that property. Otherwise, because that's a safety feature. So you're not accidentally running tests in prod or any other non-test.
In fact, let's look at that right now. So on this test framework application, you'll see that there is a module for properties. And these all need to be, or this right here needs to be enabled before you're going to run the tests. So if you don't have that on, that will always default to false. And if you don't turn it on, then it will not run the tests on your system. And then this down here is what turns on that extra JSON that I was just showing you.
Ah, that's where it came from.
Yes. So, okay. So that's what tests look like. That's what kind of results look like. And now let's go back over to the suites. And you'll see that a suite is, let's pick mixed test suite is the one I want to look at. Test suites, as I said, can contain in them a series of tests, and they can have an execution order defined if you want to run these tests in a certain way. For example, you may want to run them with a test that you may run them with like the most I want to say error prone, like the tickiest test first. And if you have it, for example, set to you may want to run it with like the cheapest test, like the fastest, cheapest test first, with abort on failure true, because if these things are going to find a failure, you want to find them fast. This is what I was talking about before, where I actually misunderstood it for a little while, where I thought that you were configuring basically a suite, that the suite configures whether you fail on, whether you stop execution, whether you abort running the test on failure. You actually do it per test down here. So you could change this if you want to. So you can say that a failure of this test will now stop the whole suite. Now, as we see down here, this suite can contain a set of tests. It can also contain other suites. And this is a mixed one that has a couple tests, a couple lone isolated tests. It also has a suite. And in fact, we had a question that came up from our walkthrough. And you'll notice in here, and I'll actually I'll answer the test as part of the demo of this, that this child G has two tests, basic UI test and simple UI test. Mm-hmm. If we go back to our mixed test suite, I've got basic UI test as a lone bare test over here. That test is also contained in child set G, or child G test suite, right?
Is it going to run twice?
Well, let's see. I actually know the answer now because I did this earlier today.
I also noticed that there's an execution order on the test suites, on the tests in the test suite, but not on the suites. So is there an order of execution that the suites under a suite run in?
I don't believe so. Because if I look down here, I don't see that. It doesn't look like that relationship has an execution order.
Okay.
So within each suite, these guys are defining the tests. But I don't think that you can control the order of suites within your suite.
So it's reasonable to say that your suites, the tests in a suite will run in an ordered execution, but your suites should be independent enough to not have to rely on some other suite running before them.
Well, okay.
In some random order by sysid probably.
I believe I think it's even slightly weirder than that. I think they run in order of adding to this other suite. Okay. Don't take that to the bank, but I think that's I think if I add another one now, that one would always run second. I think that's the way that will work. Now, actually, the thing that you were just saying about one suite or even a test, depending on another, in fact, that doesn't happen because one of the things that we'll talk about is when you do this run, the database is rolled back. In fact, it's rolled back at the end of this test.
Oh, at the end of each test.
Yes.
Okay, so test one, if I put another test in there at 200, I can't have it depend on records being available from 100.
Yeah, no
good to
test
know.
can depend on another test because you're more or less going to do what is almost the literal equivalent of a UI rollback or a DB rollback.
Yeah.
You're gonna like set a point right before you start. You're gonna do everything, and then when it's done, all that work is gone. So it deletes almost everything that happens other than the results and any logging that you do, which makes sense in one way because, for one, so it basically gives you a fresh test environment for each run, right? Because the thing that you're talking about actually is like a terrible thing in the testing world where tests are dependent on other tests and that makes them extremely brittle. And now, that's where you lead to a lot of problems. So in fact, I think that I don't know the kind of the design decisions that went into that, but that very situation is just not even technically possible with.
It's an important thing to know when you're designing your test, though, that there is a rollback done at the end of each test.
Correct. Because now what it does is it also means that ATF is not a very good debugging tool because those records won't be there when you're done. So you can't go and if you get a failure, you can't debug it from the test because you remove the records as part of that. So let's go ahead and run this at the suite level. And as we run the test, you'll notice it's executing basic UI test.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, that's happening over here in my test runner. It's running that, and we'll finish that. And then, and you can also expand each of these tests. It's kind of in this suite, it's kind of rolled up, right? But you can expand it and see that it's, it's executing the UI test steps, et cetera, et cetera. If I close the tree view, you don't see all that. And you can see, like when I was talking before, there can be significant time that it takes to run these tests. And in fact, because I'm running, this is actually a local instance on my machine, one of the significant times is that because I'm running locally, that actually means that those screenshots have to be pushed up the wire to the cloud. So now, you know what? I just said that doesn't make any sense because it is actually being saved locally. The screenshots are also being saved locally.
Mm-hmm.
What was I think it's actually the opposite. If you're running locally, you're running your test locally, the pushing it up to the cloud is going to be a significant time. And so you see now it's doing the UI test with impersonation. It's in those. I'm going to go ahead and expand this to answer that question that we have kind of pending, which is
basic UI test run twice.
Notice, look down there.
Not
The test runner is smart enough to have seen that basic UI test was included already, and it does not run it a second time.
Or it renamed it to simple UI test.
No, the child G contains two tests. So that was a question. That was an open question we had a couple days ago, which is, does it run it twice? Does it run it a single time? And then the other open question that we had was, on what happens with suites, like the nesting of suites and their, abort on failure. But because that is defined at each test in each suite, that kind of rolls up. So if simple UI test has a test in there that's configured to abort on failure, if that suite aborts, then that will roll upwards, right? So simple child G would abort on that failure, and then mixed test suite would abort on the suite abort. So that would cascade upwards up that pyramid of containment. So, and again, as we can see, this is not, you can see that this is not a lot of tests, and you can see that it is in fact taking some time, which is the whole, in its way, a whole selling point of the automated testing, which is you don't want to be waiting on all this stuff to happen. You execute it, and you go and you do something else while that's happening. And it's just one of my personal quirks is I always have loved automation. I loved it when I was a chemist. I just love automated processes, right? I love having the robots doing the work for me. And so this actually makes me very happy.
I imagine as a chemist, you probably don't want it too automated.
Well, that's a whole different discussion. But so there you go. So you can see that all these tests passed. The whole suite took 3 minutes, and that was for not a complicated test suite. And if you go to the result, you'll see that the result for this test is kind of broken down the same way that the suite is defined, right? You've got results for each test, you got results for each suite, and then you can, if you wanted to, you can drill down into the results for that suite, which contain the results for that test. So there you go. That is what the automated test framework looks like. And let me go back to my PowerPoint. So we're coming in right on time. Before we get to the takeaways, you guys have any other lingering questions or anything you want to bring up before we wrap this up?
I don't.
No, there was a discussion a few days ago between Brian Daly on the community, and I was having a discussion with him. He was talking about the scripted interface, and we didn't show it here, but you can reference data from one step to another. So you can say, I want the incident assigned to whoever's name I put in the impersonate step in step 1. We didn't show that little cannonball icon thing. And
let's actually do that, because that's important enough. I kind of skipped over that. Oh, PowerPoint. You've fiddled with my Z order. There we go.
It's a feature worthy of going over time.
Yes, absolutely. I want to do that let's pick one of these guys. Actually, let's do my demo test, because I'm pretty sure that my demo test has us doing that.
I know basic UI test has it also.
Yeah. Okay. Now I'm looking at the wrong instance. So basic UI test. So
step 1 says, let's go impersonate the ATF user.
Right. So in this set field values,
yep.
One of the we're setting the assigned to ATF user.
Yep.
Right. That can come from here.
Currently, it doesn't. It's
right. So currently, it's hard coded. But you could say, I want to be the user that is referent. That was the result of test 1. And in fact, that probably is even a better way to configure that test, right?
Yeah. If you're doing that in a scripted server part, though, because even if we have 19 out of the box step configurations, and you can script. One of them is run a server-side script, which gives you a lot of power and flexibility. But in there, if you wanted to reference that same ATF user from a scripted step, you have to do it by sysid. And we were having a discussion offline on the community. Actually, that would be online. Yeah. How do you reference that without using sysids? Because one of our best practices says hard coding sysids is bad. And he said, well, we could do it by name if we added a name field to it. So he's going to put in an enhancement request to see, can we start referencing previous steps by a name rather than by a sysid?
Mm-hmm.
I think that was a good idea.
Right. Now let's see. Let me pick any reference field on here. So correlation ID. You notice too, I added this step in here. So test step 4 include, we submitted a form. So one of the things that you could get out of that form is either the table of that form, the name of that table, or the ID that resulted from submitting that form. So the sysid that resulted from that submission. And so you could set a test up later that's checking something based on that. And correlation ID, I just picked because I wanted it to be anything with a reference so that I would get that little cannonball. But some of these steps do return values out of them. And any step that does, you will be able to reference later on with this little cannonball icon.
We do have another question in the community before we go. Venkat is asking, how does the automation test suite handle workflows and REST message? Does it handle it currently, or is it limited to only form visibility and submissions?
It is limited to form visibility. So you're not testing workflow right now. So,
well, in a way you are. You're testing the effects of a workflow. For example, if you wanted to do an approval on a workflow, you would open a form, click the button, set a value, whatever it happens to be, and you're testing the effect. And then you can validate that the state or whatever artifacts the workflow has done have been done properly. So you're not testing it directly.
Yeah, you're not. If your workflow runs fast enough that it would be happening during the execution of this test.
Correct.
If it was a like wait one day type thing, then that's not going to happen.
That's a good point. And as far as REST, you could put that into one of those scripted server steps.
Yeah, there's definitely those are not, again, when we say those are not, for example, I could see in the future, again, this is not a forward-looking statement because I kind of specifically don't have visibility into that team on the exact things they're doing. But I could see there being a step config, which is, integrate hidden integration, execute a REST message, send a REST message with these values, where you're passing in the parameters, whatever the parameters the REST message takes, you're doing that, you're hitting the REST message, and then you're getting the results back. And then you assert on the values that are back. So then I could also see a assert JSON type thing, right? Where here we're asserting on the field of a record, but I could see us asserting on a value inside JSON. So again, that doesn't exist today. I absolutely see that would probably make a lot of sense to exist in the future. All right. Let us now wrap up. So takeaways: test framework is released in Istanbul. Tests can be created. They can be run now. We can run this ball down the field. We cannot. It improves the ability to upgrade. It is not 100% solution. So I try to be very clear on that, which is I am very, very bullish on the test framework, right? The lack of being able to do automated testing, in Java, I spent 10 years or more making myself dissatisfied unless I began with a failing test case, right? That was a discipline that I had to develop for a long time. The idea that you must begin with the test cases before you write your first line of code. And so when I came to ServiceNow, the fact that in fact I didn't have the ability to do that unless I were to do external Selenium stuff and things like that. But the fact that like within the framework itself, I couldn't do that. That was a noticeable drawback to me. So the fact that it exists and that you can do that now, is to me a big plus. But it will not be the only thing. You cannot use what we have now and do 100% validation, of the correct operation of your instance. So that shall increase over time, but it's not there yet. All right, and with that, as always, the references. Information on the wiki, but even more so, I think the wiki has kind of been freeze-dried in a moment of time.
Pretty much.
Docs.servicenow.com for the future, developer.servicenow.com. It's where I live again, the YouTube channel. And if you follow that bit.ly link, ServiceNow-TechNow, that will again take you to the listing of all the shows that has links and references and all that good stuff. So to get in touch, you can follow us on the community. You can email technow@servicenow.com. We've got Twitter. You've got the YouTube channel. We've got just a plethora of ways.
No shortage of ways to get in touch with us.
And thank you, ServiceNow. Thank you, ServiceNow support. I got a Valentine's tweet. I think I was the only person. I don't know how I got so special.
You
but
did? I didn't.
I got a Valentine's tweet from Now Support. I felt very special. So thank you, everybody, for watching. Watching live. Thank you, everybody who watches later. And thank you, Chuck, Craig, Lisa, the whole team.
Yeah, thank you.
And with that, I'm going to turn this off.
Turn your cameras back on so we can smile at everybody and wave goodbye. Thanks a lot, Dave. You did a great job.
Whew, that's a lot of talking, gentlemen, but I love this stuff. I love this job, and I love this stuff.
Till next time, we will talk to you. We are going to adjourn right now and go find out what we're doing next time. Bye now.